I am Rabbi Stephen Carr Reuben. I'm the Rabbi Emeritus at Kehillat Israel. And this is part one of a three-part series talking about my brilliant new book, A Year with Mordecai Kaplan, Wisdom on the Weekly Torah Portion. So I thought I would this evening begin with telling you about how this came to be a little bit and talking a little bit about Mordecai Kaplan, since allegedly that's what this book is about. It's not really about Mordecai Kaplan. If you've seen the book, it's actually about the Torah. It's a Torah commentary book. And it's a Torah commentary book it's the first of a series that's the Jewish Publication Society is publishing. The series is A Year with ... and bless you. And the first one is Mordecai Kaplan, and then there's already a second one out, which is A Year with the Sages. I know I won't take it personally, but the rabbi who wrote A Year with the Sages, who was the second book in the series already, Reuben Hammer, just died. So this was his last book. And they're coming out with A Year with Abraham Heschel and A Year with Martin Buber, and then I don't know who else. I know those. And about 3 years ago, I had a conversation with the rabbi who is the editor at Jewish Publication Society about possibly being the person to write A Year with Mordecai Kaplan, because I figured might as well be me. And I was semi-retired, and so I had more time. And given that I've been here at KI and talking about Mordecai Kaplan for the last 30 years, I figured I was as good as anyone else to write the book. The thing that was interesting about this particular book and this series was that they proposed the series, but they had no idea really what they wanted. They just liked the idea of having a series called A Year with Famous Jewish Thinkers. So when I had the conversation with Rabbi Schwartz, who is the senior editor at Jewish Publication Society, about possibly doing this, he said, "That sounds great. I know you, who you are, and I've read some of the things you've written, and I like them enough to give you a shot at this, so why don't you submit a few chapters." Excuse my coughing. And by chapters, at the time, we thought it would be the series would be the kind of book like a lot of the 12-step books that are out there that are just meditations. And A Year would be, with Kaplan, would be maybe 365 Kaplan quotes, one for each day, and there would be a quote, and then kind of a meditation or thought piece that I would write about what that quote meant to me, or how that, what I thought about that quote, or how we might translate that quote to a modern audience, since Kaplan's been dead for a while. Although he lived a long life, he lived to be 102, and he was born in 1881. And when I had him as a teacher, he was 90, which gave me the credibility to write the book. Oh, you were his student, so you must know something about Kaplan. In any event, so I took a shot at what appeared to be what the book was going to be about, and I picked some quotes, and I wrote some meditations about him, and I sent them in, and they thought, yeah, I don't know, maybe we shouldn't do this kind of a book. And we went back and forth for months trying to figure out what the book ought to be, what this series ought to be. And together we evolved the format that this book and then all the rest of the books had to follow, which is that it became a Torah commentary. And all the other books are going to be also the same kind of Torah commentary that will be a kind of commentary through the eyes of whoever writes the book, through the eyes of whoever's the alleged scholar, like in this case Mordecai Kaplan. So if you read these Torah commentaries, like the one I passed out to you, you will discover very quickly Mordecai Kaplan didn't write this Torah commentary. Rabbi Reuben wrote this Torah commentary. Mordecai Kaplan never particularly associated the quotes that I have of Kaplan with these commentaries. Rabbi Reuben decided, this would be a good Mordecai Kaplan quote for this commentary. And that's kind of the way it went. So the ultimate challenge of the book was to do three things. Go Torah portion by Torah portion. That's 54 Torah portions, and then one commentary for each of the holidays, which there are, I think, 11 holidays throughout the year also. And each of the commentaries would have three sections. Section one would be what's called drash, which is pshat, the sort of simple meaning of the text of whatever I happen to choose from that Torah portion. There's, you know how the Torah goes. The Torah's 5 books of Moses. It's got all of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And then it's divided up into 54 Torah portions. And of course, if you ever come to a Torah study, each week has its own, each Shabbat has its own portion. And we read them in order every year until we start it all over again, over and over again. So each portion has got several chapters in it and what have you. In this case, the author of this book, this brilliant new book, Stephen Carr Reuben, picked one sentence from the Torah portion that would be the representative of that Torah portion for whatever reason. He picked it. Then he would have a paragraph that sort of had a few explanations of something in that particular portion. Then there would be Mordecai Kaplan wisdom, and in which I would select a particular passage as the Kaplan passage, and then usually have at least one other Kaplan reference in that section. And the third challenge, 4 challenges. The third challenge is that the last in each commentary would be a personal reflection based upon my 40 years as a rabbi, and all of you who can see yourselves in the book, from various incidents and things and experiences, just being a congregational rabbi and life in general, my family and things like that I thought would be another way of reflecting on the Torah portion. And it's sort of like I always picture my junior high class, where you'd have maps of Europe, and then there'd be an overlay that would say, this is what it looked like in, the Middle Ages, and then another overlay, and this is what it looked like before World War I, and then this is what it looks like now, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what this is. It's a passage from the Torah and an overlay of Kaplan and an overlay of me, although it's all really an overlay of me under the guise of Kaplan, in part. And somewhere in there, the other challenge of the Jewish Publication Society was to make sure I also included some references to traditional rabbinic sources, Talmud, Midrash, Mishnah, those kinds of traditional rabbinic commentaries in each of the Torah portion. So, in order to write this book, which was like a jigsaw puzzle, I collected several hundred Mordecai Kaplan quotes. I collected several hundred quotes from Talmud, Midrash, and other rabbinic sources, and I collected a whole bunch of Stephen Carr Reuben stories from my own life and my own work and my own rabbinate, and had them. And then after I would pick the part of the Torah portion that I decided I wanted to talk about, I would have to find pieces from those that would all somehow, in my mind anyway, maybe not in the readers, but in my mind, make sense relevant to that portion, and try to illuminate that portion in a way that seemed accessible and fresh and personal. And also, the underlying idea is to introduce the wisdom and wit, because he was witty, of Mordecai Kaplan to a new audience, to people that don't necessarily read Kaplan. Some of you in the room have read Kaplan. Kaplan, was born in Lithuania, as I said, 1881, came here at the age of 8 to New York because his father, who was an Orthodox rabbi, a well-known Orthodox rabbi, was invited by the head Orthodox rabbi of New York at the time to be the head of the Beit Din, the rabbinical court in New York. So that's why they came. Kaplan was a precocious, obviously, brilliant man, and as a child he was instantly, I think he was in college at the age of 12, things like that. He was a bright guy. And so, he had fortunately, he was fortunate that his father, and he grew up very Orthodox, but his father was enlightened enough that he made sure that Kaplan had both a traditional Jewish and a secular education at the same time, so that he could excel. A half a year before his bar mitzvah, he was enrolled in the Jewish Theological Seminary already. Just in 1895, he entered City College of New York, received a BA in 1900, went on to Columbia, studied philosophy, education, sociology, and so at the time he was influenced by people like John Dewey and William James, and those were the intellectual giants at the time. And therefore, Kaplan evolved into, the non-supernaturalist that he was, that typifies Reconstructionist thought. The William James kind of influence and Emil Durkheim influence and John Dewey influence, where he was a rationalist, and he spent his life in many ways trying to combine the traditions, the richness of Jewish sancto, and he called the traditions and rituals and customs and holidays of thousands of years of Jewish tradition with modernity and the rationalism that was so popular in those days, and trying to put them together. And that's essentially what Reconstructionist thought became, and his philosophy became. And how he would constantly, but he wasn't a sociologist. He wasn't just an educator, even though he became the head of the Teachers College at Jewish Theological Seminary. He was a rabbi. And his passion was Judaism and the Jewish people. And his passion was how to inspire Jewish people and Judaism of the 20th century to be meaningful, relevant, and inspiring, and inspire people to action. So before we do what I passed out, because this is how I teach, which is whatever I think of next, I'm going to share a couple of my favorite Kaplan quotes, just to give you an idea. I did a podcast last week. Last week I did a podcast with Deborah Waxman, who's the president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, as part of their podcast series, which was fun to do. And basically what we did was we talked about Kaplan quotes and those things that inspired both of us and moved us. One of them I have actually on the wall outside around the corner. When you leave, you can go look. It's on this wall out in the lobby. Put a Kaplan quote out there about the power of community and the importance of community. But if I were asked, which I'm now asking myself because you're not asking me, but if you were to ask me what's my favorite Kaplan quote, what to me is sort of the essence of Mordecai Kaplan, it's this one. By the way, I think I ended up with 112 Kaplan quotes in the book. That's the number we ended up with. I haven't counted the Talmud and Midrash number, but I know Kaplan's got 112. This is my favorite Kaplan quote. Kaplan wrote, "The foremost problem in Jewish religion is how to get Jews to take the Bible seriously without taking it literally." To me, that's like, that says it all. That's not only Kaplan, but that's liberal Judaism. That's our struggle in the modern world of how to be, quote, religious and modern at the same time. It's how to get Jews to take the Torah, he said the Bible in his day, how to take Jews to take the Bible seriously without having to take it literally. I'm a rabbi, and I have spent my life, last 40 years anyway, of my life, in the community, and I can for sure not count the number of times people have come up to me and said, I'm not religious, Rabbi, ... And by not religious, what they mean is I don't take this stuff literally. I don't believe all that stuff that's written in these ancient texts of whether it's Jewish texts or the New Testament or anybody else's testaments, ancient texts. Seems like mythology to me, so therefore I'm not religious because I don't buy into all of that. And, of course, Kaplan was one who constantly reminded us, God didn't reveal the Torah reveals God. That is, the Torah, for Kaplan, and the Jewish life itself and the values that the Torah represents is how we find holiness and divinity in the world. Any of you who have been around here a long time know that often I say, these are God's hands, these are God's eyes, this is God's ears, this is God's mouth. This is how God works in the world. That, that God, for me, isn't some supernatural being that, although I pray every day, as a matter of fact, I don't expect some supernatural being to somehow reach down and do anything. Heal anybody, make anybody sick, whatever a supernatural being might be able to do. Instead, this is how I see how God works in the world, by us showing up and doing godly things. That's how God gets manifest. And that was very Kaplanian. So this particular quote is really what it means, the struggle in many ways, the challenge in many ways of being a modern, in this case Jew, but I would say any religion, which is, how do you experience the sacred texts of your tradition in a way that is meaningful and relevant to your life, contemporary, even though it's written 3,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 500 years ago. And we have the Torah, that's our foundation, our Torah scroll. That's what this book's about, after all, week after week after week. The ideas of our tradition that, of course, if you try to take it literally, somebody wrote it all. I mean, if I had a Torah scroll, but I don't. Somebody wrote the Torah. It didn't drop from heaven. Somebody wrote it. I did 2 weddings in the last 2 weeks. And at both weddings, people were talking about, and I did a combination baby naming baptism a couple weeks ago with a minister friend of mine in someone's home. Obviously interfaith marriage. Wanted to honor both traditions. I did a Hebrew baby naming. Pastor Ken did a sort of symbolic baptism. Like, what is that about? Who does? I mean, I do it, but who does? Who does that? What?
Belts and suspenders.
Yeah. It is in each of those cases, and with the weddings and the rituals of the 2 weddings I did, both of which were interfaith weddings. I think. I have to think about it. I'm having conversations with the people involved and saying things like, "Don't forget, somebody made all this up. Somebody invented all these rituals. Where did it come from? That we have a glass, we put wine in it, and we go, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and it means whatever it means. Or what does it symbolize? Or it symbolizes joy, or it symbolizes sweetness, or it symbolizes, we are meaning makers, human beings. That's what we do. We take things that are things, and we're magicians. We take out our magic wand, and we go, abracadabra, this now means whatever we say it means. That's what we do, right? We say it means something. And if enough of us buy into it, we collectively say it means the same thing. And we celebrate it, and we repeat it, and we do it over and over again. And of course, any ritual, since I did weddings, I'm thinking about them, any ritual like stomping on a glass or something like that, which we immediately associate with Jewish weddings. And if I asked everybody, what does it mean? I'd probably get at least 3 or 4 anyway. It means this, or this is what they said at my wedding, or this is what I heard last week. And, and every rabbi, cantor, or anybody else who officiates makes up their own that they like and say, this is what it means. And when I do weddings, I always say, often in life, never mind, I won't even tell you. But I say something because I happen to like a particular explanation of what it means. You won't find it anywhere else. I made it up. But People like it. And I don't like one of the traditional ones has to do with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. We should always remember our sadness in the midst of our joy. Not my favorite idea, so I don't bring those into weddings. I could, or people talk. There's all kinds of things. As soon as we buy into a ritual as meaningful, it takes on its own life. And what Kaplan introduced to the Jewish world, the whole definition of Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, which shifted everybody's thinking. When he wrote Judaism as a Civilization in 1934, he was saying that before that, but that was sort of he wrote 12 books and a bunch of other things. And he was if anybody sort of studied Kaplan, one of the things you discover is he was a fanatical diary writer. Thousands of pages of diary over his whole life exist right now at the College for Reconstructing Judaism. I think most of them are there, some of them are somewhere else. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, because he wrote every day for his whole life, basically, diaries. And there's some books starting to come out about his diaries. But Kaplan introduced this notion that what's Judaism? It's not a race, it's not a religion in the narrow sense of a system of belief, because, of course, what gives, as Kaplan so appropriately said, what gives Jews our identity is not primarily belief, but rather belonging, sense of belonging to the Jewish people. And so when he articulated this idea that Judaism is the, quote, evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, he started unpacking that. It starts with evolving. That's the whole point. It's not the same today as it was 3,000 years ago, clearly. It's not the same as it was in biblical times when we had priests and everybody else, and we had, animal sacrifices. We don't do that anymore. Sometimes I have to tell people we don't do that anymore, but we don't do that anymore. Animal sacrifices. It's not the same as in the Middle Ages. It's not the same as, it's always changing and evolving and growing. So in little ways, like when we built this building and this sanctuary, 1997, when did we build this thing? We have an eternal light that's solar powered. Well, we were the first solar powered eternal light on this part of the world anyway. I thought that was a cool idea. Well, where's the whole idea of eternal light come from in the first place? It's like the modern version of somebody interpreting the Torah, where in the Torah it says all the priests are commanded to light fires on the altar and to keep them burning all the time. As a symbol of God's presence, this fire burning all the time. Fire is cool and powerful. Well, we don't have fires burning all the time. We have an eternal light. That's our modern version of the same thing, right? Our fire is burning. And we, in fact, designed our eternal light to look like a big flame. It's like this big, cool, oversized flame in there. So Kaplan was smart enough to recognize if Judaism was going to survive and matter, because he didn't want it just to survive. He wanted it to matter. If it's going to matter, it needs to mean something to you. And not have people just do it because this is the way we've done it. Well, this is how my parents taught me, so I'm going to do it this way. If it doesn't mean anything, the whole modern American the whole Reform movement started in Germany that way, Reconstructionism, conservative Judaism, everything that's not Orthodox started essentially as a way of how do we make Judaism relevant to this day, whenever this day happened to be, and not just do, by rote. We're supposed to open up the prayer book to page 1 and finish on page 20, and whoever gets there first wins. But it doesn't matter what it says; it's just doing it in a traditional sense. So part of this, what makes modern Jews, and part of the whole reason for writing this book, besides it gave me something to do for a couple of years, was to try to make meaningful and relevant tradition from the past, ideas of the past. So that's really Kaplan number 1. How to take the Torah seriously without having to take it literally. How to see the Torah as metaphor. And his poetry. It's like he recognized, if I want to tell you I really love you, I may say, Carol, I love you with all my heart. And Carol would go, you love me with a muscle pumping blood. Thanks a lot. You know, that's taking it literally. I love you with all my heart. Ew. It's kind of gross if you think about it. You know, but obviously that's not how we interpret, understand, and hear, I love you with all my heart. We hear it in a different way. We have revalued the notion of heart into something other than the physicality of the muscle that pumps blood, which is what a heart is, for all the doctors in the room, right? Even I know that much. So that's what the Torah is to Kaplan. The Torah is somebody saying, I love you with all my heart, but also about values and ethics and a way of life. So here's one of Kaplan's I like. This is one of his pithies. You have to think about it. He said, there are two kinds of people, those who stop to think and those who stop to think. I guess it would have been better if he said those who stop thinking, but that's what he meant. You know, he tries to have a turn of phrase all the time. He was pithy and a little sardonic and awful, and sometimes afraid of where people's minds were going. But another one that I love, here's another pithy one. Those to whom every inherited folly is holy are mainly to blame for there being so many to whom everything holy is folly. You have to think about that, but it's a great phrase. You know, that's how he thought. He thought he was angry with and frustrated with the reducing of religion to sort of pat responses and things that really didn't have guts in them. He thought what a religion should do is not inspire people just to pray. A religion that works is one that inspires people to act in the world and change the world. Otherwise, the religion is failing. And he saw Judaism in the failures of Judaism as those aspects of Judaism that didn't inspire people to actually do something in the world to make the world better, which I thought was always fabulous. I'll share a couple more quotes and then we'll do a little bit of this. Another one of my favorites. It takes the sensitivity of genius to recognize the significance of the familiar. It takes the sensitivity of genius to recognize the significance of the familiar. What did he mean by that? What does that sound like to anybody? You can't be present. It's like, you know, we hear the phrase, people walk sightless through miracles every day. As I said, I pray every day. What do I pray every day? I do these 3 traditional prayers. I said it often. Every morning, the wake-up prayer, when you say, I do it in Hebrew, but, you know, Moda ani lefanecha, I say, thank you, God, I woke up. That's the first prayer of the morning that you're supposed to say every day in Jewish tradition. Moda ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, shechazarta bi nishmati b'chemla, rabba emunatecha. It's a great prayer, which says, essentially, thank you, God, I woke up and got my soul back. We had this traditional notion that when you sleep, your soul leaves you, your body, and goes back to God and gets recharged, rejuvenated, and then put back, I should have been a rabbi, put back in your body when you wake up. I have a very quick soul. I keep waking up all the time. Goes, comes back, goes, comes back. Yeah. It's like go to sleep and 4 hours later wake up and go, why are you waking up for? What's wrong with you? Go back to sleep. In any event, so there's the 3 traditional prayers. That's why I say them every morning. I say that one, and then I say the prayer about the holes and orifices of my body, which is the traditional prayer that gives thanks for the miracle of our physicality. You know, it's the doctor's prayer. You're supposed to say it every time you go to the bathroom, actually, and other times. If you have sex, you're supposed to say it then too. But it's like, Nekavim, Nekavim, Chalulim, Chalulim, Galui v'yadu lifnei kisei kavadecha. You say, literally, it's very graphic. It's you thank God for this body that's filled, has holes and orifices, that if the ones that were supposed to be opened were closed, or the ones that were supposed to be closed were open, it'd be impossible to exist. You thank God as that source of healing. And when you say that prayer, which I do every morning, you can't help but be conscious of not only the things that don't work, but the amazingness of your body, the incredible resilience of the human body, that we are both at the same time incredibly fragile and incredibly resilient at the same moment, which is always remarkable. But our ancestors were smart enough to say, after you wake up, then go, everything here? And still, most of it's still working? How is it working? That's amazing. Okay, next, you go from the body to the soul. Then you say, Elohai Neshama, Shenatata bi Toharai. Then you say, God, the soul you gave to me came pure from you. You breathed it into me, and someday you're going to take it back. It's this traditional notion. So you go from waking up, the miracle of birth and rebirth every day, to the consciousness about the miracle of your body. Since I'm not a doctor, I know there's all these organs in there that do something. I don't even know where they are, but thank God they know where they are, and they know what they're supposed to be doing, because they're just doing it anyway, without me having to go, okay, back to my heart, pump, 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 go here, go, you don't have to do that. It just happens. And then you say a prayer about, is it for me? You say a prayer about your soul. And it's a way of acknowledging, I was meeting with a family today about a funeral we're doing tomorrow. I'm doing tomorrow, I guess. Well, they're all doing it. And, part of the conversation this afternoon is about physicality versus spirituality, which Kaplan was very conscious of. And when I'm involved in people's deaths and funerals and memorials and things like that, there's inevitably conversations about the nature of relationships are spiritual, not physical. I mean, we may like someone's body and be attracted to them physically and like to be around them and next to them and be able to touch them and all, which is good, but that's not what the relationship's really about. Relationship, once you have a relationship, you have it. And whether the person's in the room next door and you can't see them, or whether they're living in Paris, got a couple of people living in Paris here in the room, kids living in Paris, if they're living in Paris and they're thousands of miles away, or they're not on the planet anymore, the relationship doesn't diminish once you have that relationship, because it's spiritual. It's not about this. It's not about this even. It's that connection you have that's there forever. That's there forever. And death doesn't take that away. It doesn't erase it. Things change and evolve. And part of this notion about taking the Torah seriously without taking it literally, also in the grand scheme, is exactly this kind of conversation for Kaplan. How do you understand spirituality in a modern sense? And the world is, in many ways, I guess, divided up into the physical and the spiritual. And this is the physical, but all the things that matter in life are not the physical. Every time people talk about the things that matter in their life, it's not physical. It's the spiritual things. It's their thoughts, their ideas, their values, their concepts, their dreams, their hopes, their plans, those things which are not physical. That's the realm of the spirit. And in every generation, you need to create new values for those that we take from the past to make a sense of connection. This takes the significance, the sensitivity of genius to recognize the significance of the familiar, is his recognition that we find godliness in the world in which we live. The everyday miracle, what I'm always calling the everyday miracles of life, when we're open to them, we either see them or we don't. The world is the way it is. The people in the room are sitting in the room. You either look around and go, ooh, look at all these little godliness people hanging out in here. Or, I don't like the way that person looks. I don't know, she's a little that, he's a little this. How come that? We had this event. Some of you were there. Yesterday? Wow. We had this event in town yesterday about prejudice at the Methodist Church that the Ministerial Association put together. And we had more than 100 people showed up. We were all shocked. We thought 20 people would show up. There were more than 100 people there yesterday to interact with each other from all the different religious institutions and talk about issues of prejudice and what's going on in the world and how we can overcome our divisiveness and the prejudices that we tend to show up with. That's recognizing the significance of the everyday and trying to find holiness in the everyday. Maybe one more. Oh, here. Maybe more than one more. But this is a classic Kaplan. Only when we improve life can we find life worthwhile. That's behind all of his philosophy and theology, is about improving life, period. I quoted this one, I think, last High Holidays, actually. What does it mean to be good? It means to make things and people better. That's Kaplan. What does it mean to be a good? It means to improve the world. I won't say that one. It's in this year's High Holiday sermon. And for all of those of you who didn't get to go yesterday, I was going to quote this, but I didn't. This is one of Kaplan's. To love God is to refuse to be depressed by the world.
Oh, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Would you say that today?
Yes. Wait a minute. Let me see something. Hang on. Let me see. Here are all the quotes used in this book. Hang on. One quote, I just have to find this because I know in this group you'll really appreciate it. I should have thought of this beforehand. Where is it? Here we go. This one's in the book. You have to just find it somewhere. For those of you who are into politics, beware of people who combine massive intellectual ignorance with brilliant powers of salesmanship.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. 1922. Wow. Beware of people who combine massive intellectual ignorance with brilliant powers of salesmanship. This actually was, post-Hitler. This was really a comment about the Hitler world in which he lived through, and fascism and all of the isms that were about in the world, and all the masses of people who would follow one dictator or another, and unlike today, where we don't do that. Anyway, but, and the very first one that I used in the book, in the very first chapter of Genesis, which I didn't give you, but I'll do it anyway. The very first, what happens in the very first chapter of the Torah? We create the world, right? But the one that I picked was actually from chapter 2 that says, God said, it's not good for the human to be alone. I will make a fitting counterpart for him. And I talk about that. And the Kaplan quote that I picked to go along with that is, being important to someone, being needed by someone, that is fulfillment or salvation. Because Kaplan talked about salvation, he used the term salvation a lot as in reference to God. People would ask him about God, which to him was not an external supernatural being. He would talk about God as, that power that makes for salvation, which didn't really communicate much to people when that phrase. If I say it, it's like the power that makes for salvation. Well, then you have to ask, what does salvation mean? If God is the power that makes for salvation. But he really, influenced by the psychology and the psychologists of his time, he really saw salvation as a kind of personal fulfillment in the world, a sense of wholeness as a human being. And that he saw as a result of relationships, that to be holy and to be whole as a human being in many ways requires us being in relationship with other human beings, whether it's a partner that we live with or a community with which we interact that fulfills who we are and allows us to be our best selves. So, what else did I want to tell you about Kaplan? Oh, my personal experience with Kaplan as teacher was, as I said, Kaplan was 90 and living in Jerusalem. My first year of rabbinic school, 1971-72 was when I started rabbinic school. I was ordained in 1976. And first year of rabbinic school, I was in Jerusalem. And Mordecai Kaplan was living there, and he graciously opened his home, his apartment, to students from the Hebrew Union College and the Jewish Theological Seminary, the Reform at the time, Reform and Conservative rabbinical seminaries, who had students living and working and studying, mostly studying, in Jerusalem. So he had a class in his apartment. So we would go to his apartment, and it was one of those literally sitting at his feet, because he was in a chair and I was sitting on the floor. Literally on the floor of his living room in his apartment, a handful of us would go, once a week and sit at Kaplan's feet and have him yell at us, mostly because that was his nature. He was this big, strong, blustery, brilliant guy. So he would talk about, for me it was amazing. It was an amazing, life-transforming, really, experience to be there with him, because he was obviously, when you're in the presence of greatness like that, people, he's one of many that are, extraordinary human beings in their time. You know it. You can't not know it. And besides, I'd studied Kaplan the 2 years before. My junior year of college, I was in Jerusalem at the Hebrew University studying an education abroad program, like some of your kids are doing around the world at the moment. I was in Jerusalem. I wanted to go to Paris, but my French sucked, so they wouldn't take me. So I went to Jerusalem because you didn't have to speak Hebrew at the time. You could speak. The program was in English. And one of my classes at the Hebrew University was contemporary Jewish thought, and half of the class was about Kaplan, because frankly, Mordecai Kaplan was the single most influential Jewish thinker of the 20th century in America, and probably in the world. He influenced generations of, certainly, rabbis in both the Reform and Conservative movement. He taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary for 50 years. That's 50 years. He, transformed the very thinking of American Jews about themselves, Judaism, and the role in the world. And so I had studied him and his writings then, and then there he was. And I was sitting in his presence, and he would do things like, he would talk about, kind of lecture about Jewish life and how he saw Judaism and what we needed to do to make Judaism work in the future, and constant emphasis on community and on putting aside, our differences. Even then, he has this notion in his writings about the organic Jewish community. And to him, the organic Jewish community, our version of it is Jewish Federation, didn't quite do what he wanted it to do. What his vision was that we would organize as a Jewish community as a democratic group of people who would then elect leaders. And the community, we would all not pay dues to individual synagogues. We would pay dues to the Jewish community. And, it was kehillah, that was a European, Middle Ages European idea, the kehillah, the community, the people that had a tax, and then the Jewish community would make sure to get kosher food and things like that. So Kaplan had, in the modern world, this idea that that's what we should do. So in Los Angeles, we should all pay our dues to the Jewish Federation, let's say, that would be a representatives from all of our different communities, Jewish communities, and the community as a whole would then support any kind of prayer experience that anybody wanted, any kind of Jewish arts experiences, Jewish educational experiences would come from a sort of a central location that we would all pitch in our money to, and rather than individual synagogues competing with the same people down the street for dues and all that kind of stuff. So he had this sort of global notion of what he called the organic Jewish community. So he used to talk about that, and then in the middle of a sentence, he would turn to one of us and he would go, "What did Rabbi Akiba say?" Just like that. And you'd have no idea what he was talking about. And even if you did, you'd be struck, terrified, and you wouldn't be able to answer anyway. It was terrifying. But, you figure, okay, he's a genius. And he was 90 at the time. You can just imagine in the strength of his, being 40 or 50, let alone 90, because he was terrifying at 90. What it was like. I think the most famous Kaplan story that captures him when he was teaching was he would have part of his class, one of his classes at the Jewish Theological Seminary would be a Torah commentary class. And what he would do is he would assign a passage, let's say, since I passed it out, this week's Torah portion, which is Ki Tavo, so he might assign this particular passage, which would be, Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "You have seen," isn't it exciting? I'm actually using something I passed out. "You have seen all that Adonai did before your very eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his courtiers and to his whole country. The wondrous feats that you saw with your own eyes, those prodigious signs and marvels, yet to this day Adonai has not given you a mind to understand or eyes to see or ears to hear." That's the quote. So he would assign a quote like that on Monday to his class, and he would give his own drosh, his own interpretation on Monday in his class. And then everybody was supposed to come up with their own, and on Friday he would pick somebody, call them up in front of the class, and they would give their interpretation of this passage. And the most famous Mordecai Kaplan story is the time when he did that in class. Friday comes, he calls on a student, the student gets up and almost literally word by word gives exactly the same Torah commentary that Kaplan himself gave on Monday. Kaplan stood in the back, listened to him, said, "That's terrible." And the student rightly said, "But Dr. Kaplan, that's the same commentary that you gave on Monday." And Kaplan looked at him and said, "I've grown since then." That was Kaplan. That's what this is all about. It's about how do you stay fresh? How do you stay new? How do you see the world through new eyes? So I write this sort of little explanation piece in the beginning about that particular sentence from the couple sentences from the Torah, from this week's Torah portion, that in which I basically explain that what Moses is saying here is, even though you literally experienced the Exodus from Egypt, even though you literally experienced, you were slaves and you went free, what more could you possibly ask to have a direct experience of God than, in biblical times, then you were slaves, you're now not slaves. Hello? You saw what God did to Pharaoh. You saw what God did to all of those soldiers who drowned in the sea when the sea closed up. You saw that, as the Midrash then reminds us, that what I call this is the miracle generation, right? First welfare state, that's what you said, Bob? The miracle generation, according to the Torah, during the 40 years of wandering, it was a terrible shopping opportunity because shoes didn't wear out and clothes didn't wear out, and, hi Becky, shoes and didn't wear out, and nobody ever had to go shopping for anything, and you got food every day. In one of these commentaries I talk about what I call the manna principle. Manna, that's the famous food that they ate for 40 years wandering in the desert. Now, the rabbis in their Midrashic commentaries say, what did the manna or manna taste like? Tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. Mm-hmm. It tasted different for everybody. whatever you wanted. For you, it was a hot fudge sundae today, and tomorrow it's like kale. I don't know, whatever turns you on, but whatever. My wife won't eat kale. She says, when I grew up in the Bronx, kale was a garnish. Nobody. He'd put out the platter for the bar mitzvah, and kale would be that stuff they put around the outside. You eat that stuff? No. Anyway, so I live with this. The mana principle is, as the Torah says, every day they'd wake up and there'd be manna there to eat, or manna, as you like, and you could eat it. But what's the catch in the Torah? How much could you gather? You could only gather enough for one day. That's what it says. Every day would be there, and then you were commanded, this is your food. You gather up enough to eat that day. And what would happen if you gathered more than one day's worth? It would go spoil and turn bad. It would instantly spoil. You greedy person, you. It's an amazing thing to think about. To me, the mana principle is this notion of living every day with faith. I'll survive tomorrow.
Wow.
Right? Shabbat, you got a double portion. Yeah. Friday, you get a double portion because you're not supposed to gather on Shabbat because it's work. So except for Shabbat, you get a double portion on Friday. The whole mana principle is, okay, I'm only going to take enough for today because I have to have faith there'll be more tomorrow. That tomorrow, when I wake up, I'll be able to live again another day. And then the next day, I'll be able to do it again. And it's this challenge to live every day as if that's the only day. Because with mana, that's the only day. It's all you get. You want to eat today? You get today's food. You can't store up like for the winter, like whatever those people that store it up for the winter do. And chipmunks? No. Squirrels, whatever. Mixing metaphors. Right. And here, Moses is saying, in this particular Torah portion of this week, you lived through this miraculous world every single day, and yet you still have no faith. And yet, human beings, you're so fickle. It's like, what have I done for me? What have you done for me lately? It's what have you done for me in the last 3 minutes? Because 5 minutes ago was okay, but then what? Where'd you go? And we have this insatiable need, human beings, to constantly tell me you love me. Constantly. I told you I loved you yesterday. You didn't believe me yesterday? It's like every day. Yes, I tell Dee Dee I love her every day. She's insatiable too. Every day. But, because it's a privilege to be able to do that, because we're still both together and here. So Moses is saying, no matter, even though you had a direct experience of the sacred, it's still not enough for you. It's like never enough. And that's one of the great human challenges of life. When is anything enough? When is there enough money? When is there enough friends? When there is enough of anything that we want? What's enough? What does enough mean to us? It's one of the great challenges and scourges of humanity is that there's never enough. If there was, we wouldn't have all these billion and billionaires out there with more and more people being poorer and poorer. And the greater and greater people would go, 1 billion's enough. I can live on that. What can I do with my rest of my billions? Who can I help with that? We have a rising homeless population in LA and everything else. So that's what this Torah portion is about. But Kaplan, so I have Kaplan. My Kaplan quote on the next page is, in religion as in all other manifestations of human life, there are 3 distinct states: experiencing, knowing, and understanding. Why did I pick that quote? What does that have to do with Moses telling them, you guys, you faithless guys, no matter what, even though you had a direct experience of things, somehow you're not there? Why does anyone think I picked, in religion as in all other manifestations of human life, there are three distinct states: experiencing, knowing, and understanding? What do you think? Because I picked it.
They're all linked, even though you say they're distinct, they are all linked.
Yeah. Experiencing, knowing, understanding. Kaplan saw that as a progression. Kaplan saw this as what Moses was talking about. Well, I saw Kaplan seeing this as what Moses, I don't know if Kaplan saw it. It would be terrifying if he actually was here looking at what quotes I picked for each of these Torah portions, but he's not, so I get to do it. So, yeah, experiencing. So we all have experiences every day. We experience our lives. What does it mean? What do our experiences mean? What determines what our experiences mean to us?
Our attitude.
How to understand them.
We discern our attitude, our understanding. We have an experience. Like, how many of you have gone to see a movie with somebody, and the movie's over, and you went, "You didn't like that?" Or, "I hated that," and the person's going, "What?"
Yeah.
That was cool. I mean, the movie was exactly the same. It's on film. It's fixed. It's not a different movie for you than it is for the person sitting next to you. It's literally the same movie, right? Exactly the same. But everybody that's there is seeing it through their own filter, through their own experience. They're not experiencing it the same, even though they are all experiencing. It's like, well, today I'll go back to my reference of my funeral tomorrow. I'm sitting with a family, 2 kids. Their mother died. Sitting with the husband and 2 kids. 2 kids, close, great family, go on vacations together.
Little kids?
No, adult kids. 39 and 37. With kids of their own. Kids. Kids with kids of their own. Yeah, right. And the mother was only 72, so it was very, very sad. But in the meantime, they could have been growing up in different families. So tell me about your mother. Okay, so tell me about your mother. And that happens to me all the time. All the time. There's siblings in the family, and they're looking at each other going, "What? What are you talking about? She didn't, she wasn't, he wasn't, he didn't, he did that." All the time. Because we're all having our own experience. We're not growing up in the same family. I'm growing up in my family. You happen to be there. You're growing up in your family. I happen to be there for part of the time, doing all of that. You're talking about your kids. One of them's gone, and the other one's going, "No, don't leave me alone," because his experience is totally different than the other one. That's our life. So Kaplan's going, yeah. What does it mean to have a sacred experience? What does it mean to be moved and inspired? Because all of life, including religious experiences are made up of both experiencing and then sometimes knowing what that experience is all about. Why did that come about? Why do we do this ritual? We're about to have high holidays. Sitting for hours, listening to singing and chanting and sermons and doing this, and we do the same things every year. But every year we're different, so every year it's a different experience. Our filter is different. The glasses through which we see the world, because I have glasses, are different this year than they were last year. Slightly, for some it's profoundly, things that have happened in your life in this last year. And you sit there and you go, "Oh my God, what a year ago? This, that, and now?" Either positive or negative. People whose whole lives have changed in the last year, since last Rosh Hashanah, last New Year, new jobs, live in a new place, new relationships, and other people the opposite. The death of loved ones, tragedy, trauma, all kinds of things. That's everyone. All of us have all of that, and some of us have both of those at the same time. The blessings and the curses. My other theme of life. Life's filled with blessings and curses, and you can't always tell which is which. And sometimes one starts out as one and ends up as the other, and starts out as the other and ends up as one. So, That's what happens. And that's what Kaplan's also saying. So the filter is that quote from Moses in the Torah going, what's wrong with you guys? You couldn't have a more positive, direct experience of what godliness is than have been slaves and gone free. You were nothing. You were no one. You were powerless. And here you are. You escaped from the most powerful country on earth with the biggest, baddest, toughest, meanest army on the planet. And you walked to freedom. Whoa, you'd think you'd be going every day, singing hallelujah every day. Thank you, God. I wrote a song called that once for kids. Thank you, God. And instead it's like, it's hot out here. It's slogging. What's this desert thing? What's wrong with this? We're human beings. Right? It's like kvetching. We're the ever-kvetching people. That's the Jewish people, ever-kvetching people. But, it's like, that's the way it is. So, Kaplan recognized, look what I wrote. For religion to matter, belief in God must first be rooted in direct experience of the sacred in our lives. One's knowledge of God cannot be an intellectual process, but needed to be an intimate, immersive experience grounded in life. And then I went on. And then my meditation, my personal reflection, in this case, was about parenting, which, and I talk about one of the books I wrote once. It's called Children of Character. It's about leading your children ethical choices in everyday life. And when I wrote that book, the publisher, Marlene Cantor, former member, published the book, sent me on a little tour, one of those little book tours, which was fun. Going on a book tour, if you're not a famous author, is one of the most depressing experiences of life. Right? Because it's like they, where was I? I was in Portland. I think Portland or Seattle. They have this fabulous bookstore. I think it must have been Portland. Right? They have this famous bookstore in Portland. Powell's. Exactly. I had a book signing there with me and the homeless guy who came in from out of the rain. It's Portland. It rains. It's like, and one other person who actually came because they wanted to see who I was. But that's like most of the time for most people who aren't famous who do, quote, book signings in places, unless they really create some kind of an event. In New York, I did something where there was actually an event. There were like 20 people there, and I was giving a talk, and some Barnes & Noble posters and things like that. But mostly nobody shows up, unless you're famous, because who the hell are you? Why should I show up, come to your book signing? I did some TV shows and morning shows, and those were fun. In any event, why am I telling you this? Parenting. So I did a lot of parenting conversations also when the book came out, and workshops about parenting. And as I write in this particular commentary, I noticed every parenting workshop I would start out by asking the parents, what's one value that your parents taught you? What's something that you would say is a value? What was important that your parents taught you? And they would share whatever they would share. Be truthful, whatever it happens to be. And then I would ask, well, how did they do that? And 100% of the time, literally 100% of the time, they would answer automatically by example. Everybody. First of all, when I would ask people, where do your values come from? 100% of the time they would say, my parents. Interestingly enough. Maybe it was the crowd I was doing it with. But we learn positive and negative from parents, after all. We learn what not to do. We make our own judgments. I'm not going to do that when I become an adult or a parent. And we learn what to do. And that's this. That's my version of where do your values come from? They come from your everyday experience and how you then interpret that experience to be something meaningful. That's the overlay on this particular Torah portion, evidently. Yeah. I love that book because my Children of Character book, only because I knew that I could write the whole book in one sentence, which would be the kind of adult you want your children to grow up to be. That's really the whole point of it. But then no one would publish it, so I had to write a whole book. So someone would publish something. Not that anybody bought it, but they got the book published. So, but that's the point. The point was, be the kind of adult you want your children to grow up to be. That's sort of a version of this spiritual godliness of Moses going, okay, look, what do you need in life? What does God have to do in your life for you to recognize holiness when you experience it, sacredness when you experience it, divinity when you experience it? And because look what happened to you. Why is it that we are constantly saying, we Jews, we're always making reference to the Exodus? It's everywhere. It's the foundational experience of Jewish life and of Jewish civilization, is we were slaves and we went free. It's not just Passover, which is the big version of it. It's every single service. We sing the Michamocha, we sing whatever, which was like from the crossing of the sea. We're always reminding ourselves at every holiday, one way or another, about we were slaves and we went free. We had a direct experience of the sacred. That's what God is to us. And therefore, then there's the question of what's the meaning? We, the Jewish people, and certainly in the modern world, in our mitzvah-centered Tikkun Olam world context of today, we are always reminding, and clergy are always reminding each other that we keep reminding ourselves that we were slaves and went free so that we will act in a way that frees those who are still slaves in the world. And the sad reality that there are more slaves in the world today than there have ever been, by everybody's study of slavery in the world today. Of course, there's more people in the world today than there have ever been either, but there's more slaves. More people are enslaved in various ways around the world than ever. It's like insane, right? And poverty does that too, enslaves us. And that's why we have those kinds of prayers and meditations in our liturgy. We read the English of our liturgy, we make reference to that. The whole point, Kaplan's whole thrust, I now said it about 5 times I think, was exactly that what it means to be a religious person as a Jew in the modern world needs to be that we act in a way that liberates others and brings the world closer to the kind of world in which we want to live. The world we pray for, the Oseh Shalom Bimromav world that we pray for at the end of, during every service, we say, literally, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, may the one who makes wholeness in the heavens make wholeness down here. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu. May that power that makes unity and wholeness in the heavens make wholeness among us and all of Israel and all of creation. Kol Yoshvei Tevel, all who dwell on earth, really we say. That's our Reconstructionist version of that prayer. That's the essence for Kaplan of what the whole point of this is. The whole point of being a religious person, of doing the rituals that we do, of coming to high holidays that we're about to come to. I'm speaking, by the way, Erev Rosh Hashanah, in case anyone's interested, over at the Fox in Westwood. Yes, the 29th in the evening. It's my time. My allotted time to speak is... Last year I actually spoke on Kol Nidre because Micah was here first for his first year, and Rabbi Amy wanted Micah to be able to be introduced to the whole congregation, so had him speak on Erev Rosh Hashanah, at least because it's one of our unity services, where that's the only service we have on Erev Rosh Hashanah is the one in Westwood. But that's my normal shot to speak. So I'll be there shooting and speaking. But not with my AK-47 because we're taking those away. So,
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, no, we're not taking them away from anybody. In any event, I gave you, I'm not going to talk about it, but I gave you the Rosh Hashanah one because I know you haven't all run out and bought this book. But I did something for all the holidays, and on the holidays, this is my Kaplan version of Rosh Hashanah for you to just have and to hold and to read. So I know it says 7 to 9, but it's really 7 to 8:30 every time. It's an hour and a half and not 2. I can't stand myself for 2 hours, let alone visit myself on you. So questions, things, anybody want me to say anything about anything in particular? Yeah.
So, just without offending anyone.
You want to offend me?
It's not like the Jewish world or the other movements embraced Kaplan, and I was thinking if he was looking beyond the sages and the Talmud to inform how to make Judaism work. I mean, did the Jewish world, were they offended because he looked at different thinkers in the 20th century, and was that?
Well, the Orthodox were very offended. They they put him in cherem. They, put him in, what do you call that in English? What? No, they...
Excommunicated.
Thank you. They excommunicated him. I used to speak English. They excommunicated him from the world, from Judaism. They burned the first prayer books that he created. They had a big famous book burning in Manhattan of Kaplan, and they, spit on his stuff and whatever. But he was literally responsible for the creation of all kinds of institutions around. His ideas are what created Jewish community centers. His ideas are what created Jewish federations. I mean, directly, not just indirectly, directly. He is responsible for what's now the American Jewish University, that was the University of Judaism. When it was being formed, literally Kaplan was there forming it with them. It was that was the whole idea, as opposed to JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, which was clearly the conservative movement's bastion of rabbinical training and everything. Here we are in California, where anything goes. So in California, where anything goes, the original idea of the UJ, the University of Judaism, was to be a university of Judaism for everybody, not a conservative movement institution. But he was working in the conservative movement. He was the liberal end of it. So it ended up ultimately becoming the conservative movement's institution on the West Coast. He also was instrumental in creating Brandeis Camp, Kaplan. He was there with Shlomo Bardeen or whatever. Started with Bardeen and Kaplan. I mean, Kaplan was everywhere. Kaplan was amazing. I mean, when you study him, the impact he had. And as I said, literally, everybody claims him as, their intellectual, modern intellect, not everybody, but everybody in the liberal world, the liberal reform world, the liberal reconstructionist world, the liberal conservative world, claim Kaplan as their intellectual sort of ancestor. His writings. He changed the Jewish world by what he did. It had a profound impact. It's just, we're people, we're human, and we're Jewish, and, 2 people and 6 opinions. So we're always arguing with everybody. We can't agree on anything. And why should we be different than the rest of the world? We aren't different than the rest of the world. I mean, we are different in some ways, but we're also human beings who are the same as everybody else. My way must be the best way. I do a lot of interfaith stuff and interfaith marriages, and I've always done them for 43 years now since I've been ordained. But frankly, 2 Jews marrying each other argue just as much. We don't do that on our Passover table. We have, that's not how we do it. This is how we do it. My family, this is the right way. Because the way you were raised is the right way. It's like coming to a new synagogue and going, why do they sing that? Where's that melody come from? That's not how you do that prayer. That's not how what I learned. And everybody's that way. That's natural. It's a normal human way of responding. So, we do what we do. And the challenge is in many ways, is to retain the past and make it meaningful in the present and evolve into something else for the future, so that we're constantly evolving. I've been doing a lot of Persian Jewish weddings in the last couple of years. I sort of got on the Persian Jewish wedding circuit somehow. No, same faith, Jewish. But some are Jewish Persian, non-Jewish, Jewish non-Persian. Those are interesting relationships. The non-Persian Jews are going, What is this? You know, if you ever go to Persian weddings, first of all, they're 10 hours long, and you eat first, then you eat, and then you eat, and then you eat, and then you party all night. You know, the Persians and the Russians, they'll party all night. So, and they show up 3 hours late, of course, too. So that's the other thing. They come really late. When they show up at anything at all, show up late. So, no, I ended up, you know, the Persian community is very tight and very traditional still. So I ended up doing them because I'm me and different. So, and I did somebody's wedding, and then their cousins and whatever are calling me going, "Would you do my wedding?" Because the Persian rabbis are very traditional. So the Persian rabbis everywhere and in LA, so they'd rather have like a liberal kind of fake rabbi like me to do it, because I count, because I'm really a rabbi, but I'm not that kind of rabbi. In any event, I go there and you see the tension between parents' generation, that's the immigrant generation, and the generation that was born here for sure, or those who grew up here primarily. And it's classic. This is everybody's experience of that push and pull from one generation to the next, and how do you become modern and keep the past? And that's, you know, all of thousands of years of Jewish evolution in a nutshell right there. When you watch any immigrant community, we have a lot of immigrant community here, a lot of Persian Jewish immigrants who are in LA. We're the largest Persian Jewish community in the world, I think literally in the world, but certainly we were outside of Tehran. But I think we're now the biggest in the world. Everybody came to LA. Anyway, anything else? Yes?
This is just an observation, brief. In answer to what you started with, you are Mordecai Kaplan's posterity. That's you.
Me. Terrifying. Poor Mordecai. Yeah. Well, you know, thank you. I'll take it as a compliment. He was, having that experience with him was such an amazing privilege for me, that personal experience. And you know, for those of you who were here when I started in 1986, which is when I came here, and we're at my installation, anybody who happened to be at my installation here, because I was from the Reform movement and grew up in the Reform movement, and because this is has always been a Reconstructionist congregation, and I wanted to demonstrate some kind of Reconstructionist yichus and connection, really. Before my installation, Shabbat, Dee Dee and I flew to New York and went to, remember? Yeah, we went to New York, brought her brother with a camera, and we visited with Judith Kaplan, because I would have visited with Kaplan, but he was dead by then. So I went to his daughter, was the next best thing, and Ira Eisenstein, now his disciple, and son-in-law, who married Judith, the first bat mitzvah in America. And they were living in Woodstock at the time. We went there and we interviewed them, because they were friends. They'd been here many times and were friends with Abe Winokur, KI's founding rabbi. And so I interviewed them about Reconstructionism and about KI and about anything that would make me look like I knew what I was talking about, Reconstructionism. And then we made a little video of it. We showed it at my installation. That was like getting their, like, hex, you know, the sword on my shoulders or something like that. That was the notion in my mind anyway. Although the sound wasn't great, because it was like not really. It was an amazing experience, and it was an amazing interview. You have a copy of that? It's like, yeah. First of all, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein was such a character. Right? She was like adorable as a human being. Also tough, like her father in many ways. But she and Ira were like Tweedledum and Tweedledee together. As a couple, they were. He was a very smart man, and she was very smart, musicologist and whatever. And when I would ask, we talked to them about. I know this has nothing to do with tonight, but it was great about how they met. You know, and how did you guys end up together? And they were teaching religious school together. And so I said, so what I decided we should do, I was interested, is I should get her to write with me a play, write a musical for the kids in the religious school together. And then I would be able to spend time with her. So how many years ago was this when I was talking to them? A long time ago, right? They weren't young then. And they're sitting there while they're telling me this, singing the songs that they wrote together for this musical like 40 years earlier, right? And she'd go, yeah, it was like, da, 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 but they're singing these words, and he would jump in with finish the second half of the verse, and then she would go. It was like so adorable and fantastic. And it's a reminder. Ira was a very intellectual, wrote a lot of books. He was the really driving force behind creating all the institutions of the Reconstructionist movement, because Kaplan wasn't that kind of a guy. But what mattered was their relationship and the sweetness and the cuteness and the living together, and like everybody else, human beings were human beings. So it's a great interview. We should watch it again sometime. Anyway, thank you all for coming. And there's a couple more opportunities for me to talk about different things. Maybe I'll be more specific on the book next time. But have a wonderful Rosh Hashanah. For those I'm going to see, come and hear my brilliant sermon on the 29th. Thank you all.